Good evening, Equestria. Tonight on Ministry of Morale Public Radio, we are happy to present our feature program. For your listening pleasure, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Well, it's been a long time in the waiting, but it's finally being done. The review of Fallout Equestria by KCAT.
Indeed, it has been. As promised last October, the Fallout Equestria review is finally on Lunar Echoes. Now, on with the show. I'm your host, Clockwork.
And I'm your guest host, SkyBolt.
And I'm another guest host, Maybell or Maybe Pony.
And welcome to Lunar Echoes. Now, before we have to actually start talking about that long fanfiction that we fought Nelth Tooth and Claw through, I have to state that
the spoiler warning is in effect, so if you haven't read it, you may want to remain spoiler-free, skip this podcast for now, and then come back to it later after the thrilling conclusion.
But to break from tradition, we are not doing any announcements this time. Instead, this is all about Fallout Equestria.
So we are finally starting a Fallout Equestria podcast, or doing a Fallout Equestria podcast review, because for any pony who's read it, and I'm sure you all have if you stuck around past that little spoiler warning, is that this is not a small fan fiction. For reference, for people who may not be completed with high school or college or don't know much about the English-speaking world, the average novel length for an American novel or an English-language novel is about 100,000 words. And in standard font and standard prints that most publishing companies go with, a 100,000-word novel is about 300 to 400 pages. Think of your average Michael Crichton book, your average... what do the kids these days listen to? I almost said Stephen King, but he's nowhere near average. Or Game of Thrones. But this novel is more akin to Crime and Punishment. If you were ever forced to read that during school about a story about a Russian guy who ends up going to jail and a whole bunch of other stuff, that novel was about 500, 600,000 words. It's massive. Like 2,000 page massive. Like Bible massive. Yes, for those of you who might come from a religious background, the Bible is roughly 750,000 words. So if you take off all the lists of, the Israelites and the Camelites and all these guys, you've got Fallout Equestria, which ironically some people treat like a Bible because it's just that good.
Yeah, it's pretty long, but I think when you actually sit down and you get into it and you actually go through the process of reading it, you just can't stop reading it. It's one of those things that maybe after the first, second, third, fourth, and 20th chapters, you just have to know what happens next. But much like Crime and Punishment, it has its ups, it has its downs, and it has its way downs.
I know a lot of people that read a lot of fanfics have probably come across this before, and it is, if it's not the best known, it is definitely one of the best known fanfics. And is definitely one, if you enjoy reading fanfics, everyone should give it a shot. The size is daunting, but for those of you that maybe don't have a lot of sit-down time in front of your computer, since it's all, I don't know if there's a way to get a paper copy other than printing one out, but there's a lovely person who did an audiobook version that you can find them through YouTube.
Yes, it was crazed rambling, and that's actually how I absorbed the book, because if you're like me, I have a pretty, 9-to-5 office job, and I was going to school up until just this last December, I had a pretty busy life, and even doing silly pony stuff on the internet was not really conducive to my free time. And so when Fallout Equestria finally finished, and I'm like, okay, I really should read this, because I like Fallout, and this is like something I'll probably get into. Obviously. And so I listened to his audiobook version, which he had just finally completed, and that's how I absorbed the story. It took a month of listening pretty much 6 hours a day at work, so that should be indicative of how long this thing really is. And it's funny, for those of you who don't realize it, Fallout Equestria was also one of the earliest fanfics. For reference, probably the most infamous fanfic to come out of the fandom, Cupcakes, was written halfway through season 1. It was almost like a practical joke by its author, just, needless gore and etc. I think that was written in March of 2011, which I think it's around episode 20, Green Isn't Your Color time frame. And so, of course, this is pre-Pinkamena, and so, of course, Pinky wouldn't have had the straight hair and all that stuff, if you're into that sort of canon. Cupcakes canon. But anyway, Fallout Equestria started getting written in May of 2011, just after season 1 completed. And so when the story begins, that is the time frame of the story. And I think even near the end, she includes the caveat that Discord is back in his statue and sitting in a garden, possibly for all of eternity. So as far as Fallout Equestria goes, it breaks from normal story canon somewhere after the Discord setup of season 2. As all of you probably know, if you've read the story or are very involved in the story. And of course, like most really big fan fiction like this, it was written serially. It was written chapter by chapter. She had a lot of direct feedback on WeBelieveFanfiction.com is where she originally wrote it. And of course, it's been ported over to so many other sites since then. And so, you have those direct interactions with fans and you go over these small arcs. For people who think that this might be, for people who think that this might be a problem compared to normal novel writing, which is, say, the George R.R. Martin approach, if you just sit for years and then you release book 4 or book 5, this is actually how a lot of novels were written in, like, the old days. Go ahead.
Oh, like the Penny Dreadfuls and the original Stockades back in London, they did write them in serial format. That's actually how Sherlock Holmes was published originally, was chapter by chapter every 2 months.
And even in more recent memory, that's how The Hobbit was written. It was written as a series, a series of adventure stories in some London newspaper by J.R.R. Tolkien. And so, yeah, that the beloved story that kicked off the Lord of the Rings trilogy was written in the same way. And of course, that ended up being a much shorter book than Fallout Equestria. The formatting is key because you can feel the how it's sort of a series of mini adventure arcs, but luckily, like Tolkien, KCAC does a very good job of establishing a lot of character traits and establishing a lot of foreshadowing, so you still know it's a whole story. It's got that overarching plot line.
Yeah, she definitely had to have a lot of things planned out in advance to keep such really solid continuity throughout the whole thing, and to be able to reference things back, and the way the whole story kind of circles back on itself.
Exactly. Because one thing I'm sure a lot of you writers out there already know by heart is that the hardest thing with writing a large work like a novel is staying true to your own previous work. It's all about going back to chapter 5 and being like, oh yeah, this guy doesn't have a left arm. I removed that by that awesome plot arc. So yeah, he can't be wearing this.
It's true, but Fallout has a very special charm about it. It's, for one thing, it's written from first person's perspective, which is really hard in a lot of cases. And I definitely could tell you that I preferred writing in third person, or even in second person, which is like observations from a second point of view, which is even harder than most people would actually give it credit for. But first person point of view from Little Pip, who is the main character of the entire series, is just, it's really epic in a way because you get all of her thoughts and her insights and her views of other ponies, but you don't get every other pony, or even Griffin, or Dragon, or whatever some of them are.
Ghoul.
You don't get their opinions, their input. They're kind of like outside forces, and Little Pip is the internalization of the whole story. And you have to admit, that is really, really talented.
Yes, and she even plays at that really effectively in the chapter 30 range, I believe, when she removes her memories. And so everything is stored in the memory orbs based on what she had done to set up for their final assault on Red Eye's forces, or their final assault on the goddess. So Trixie doesn't know what's coming, and neither do we. So it was pretty well done, especially Orb-8, if you know what I mean.
My only question about that is, there like some secret hidden chapter that actually tells her plans and what she did, or do we never find out?
You basically find out when it unfolds. As far as I know, I'm not sure if there was any like additional information or like I wouldn't know. Again, I listened to it via audiobook form, so some of that
because you never, well, especially since the story is first person point of view, since Little Pip never finds out because she never watches those orbs, there's no way for us reading the story to ever find out because we're supposed to be observing her memories.
True, because in the end, well, she's basically making a giant recording of all her memories before she goes and becomes Weather Watcher.
I was going to say, that was probably one of the most clever wrap-ups also, was the fact that there's literally, like, this is literally a story existing in their world because she had written it down, or at least, like, thought composed it. Ghostwrite it?
Ghostwrite it, yeah.
That was so very clever, I have to say.
And then, I don't know, it was a really interesting story. So let's move on to the next topic of how it is. You know, now we know the basis of it, and anyone who's listening who has read it, they understand the literary portion of it. What about the creative side?
You mean merging two totally opposite properties together in a way that would end up becoming so effective?
Yes.
Yeah, this is, for me, I think there's actually a really good, like, psychological reason that a lot of people connect to it so well, is that the basis of any, like, horror novel or movie or whatever is sympathy. You have to feel for the main characters involved in a story. And I think what she did subliminally with Pony on this level is that compared to normal baseline people, you know, normal life and normal human stories and stuff, is ponies are so much more innocent. They're so much, you know, cuter and sweeter and more, like, deserving of sympathy in our eyes, which is, you know, part of the whole reason this fandom exploded anyway. That then when you throw them into the extreme atmosphere that is Fallout, and luckily, it's an atmosphere that isn't just straight horror or horrible events. It's a lot of tongue-in-cheek and a lot of, like, nostalgia, and I think it was much more effective in that way, because you had a further distance. You could garner more sympathy for the main characters, especially because they were well-written, completely, you know, living, breathing characters. And so I think that's the reason a lot of people were able to connect so well, or at least a shortcut to garnering that emotion faster from the reader.
A lot of it is when you're going through it, and I know when I listened to it, when I started listening to it, I hadn't played the Fallout games. I have since, just because I was so taken with the story, I wanted to see both sides of its conception. But in listening to it, and because at first I'm like, okay, original characters, but then as you start learning about, as the main six start coming into it, she's Little Pip's learning about what happened in the past, and it's all unfolding. It's very depressing in a way, but also very realistic about listening to how things just start kind of going downhill. Friendships start waning and things, and it's a lot how we in the human world, you know, have to deal with things, and especially with growing up and adulthood, and you have to do your job, and jobs take you away from friends sometimes, and it's kind of almost like it parallels what we see in the show when everything's happy, good times, and friendship and bright colors, versus the human world, which is all kind of blah. And in the story, it almost shows a transition of, you know, the good times to more what we know, and it's so very sad. Because that's where you can connect with it on that level too.
Kind of like the transition of innocence to adulthood.
And that's a good point, too, is that decay over the course of the novel is, it really does start like an innocent, you know, well, not innocent, but like a basic, straightforward, like, adventure serial. Like, you know, you've got these little arcs about, well, we're going to free the slavers from New Appaloosa or Old Appaloosa and, you know, fight off this dragon guy who's taken over the section of Junction R7 and God's Domain and, you know, all of these smaller just sort of quest items that they're taking care of. One thing I love comparing Fallout Equestria to is Avatar: The Last Airbender, because for me, I think a lot of, like, very similar, you know, any kind of big adventure story arc, they follow all the same tropes, and it's just like any adventure, it's all about the journey. It's all about the people they come across along the way, the new friends they make, the friends they lose. Steel hooves. I have to say that was the. I didn't like seeing him die. I knew one of them had to die because there were all these main characters now. There were 6 of them, and I'm like, yeah, no, something's gonna go wrong. And it's like, who would that be most poetic for? And I'm like, Yeah, probably Steel Ooze. And so then, of course, when he just dies randomly and quickly, that's how death is. It's just out of the blue, and you don't see it coming.
In a way, it's kind of... I want to say, really, it's kind of the easiest death she could have given us, because he's been, in a way, suffering so long, living without everybody he knew, without his love, everything else, and so now he can finally be at rest, because he's been persevering so long, living, with so many of his memories and things. And while it's definitely very sad to see him go, I think his was the easiest loss to accept.
Yeah, and also probably closure for him, because you see all the pain that he's endured for literally hundreds of years, the guilt and sadness, and little Pip is sort of his redemption, and she helps him work through these problems, and as they uncover all those final pieces of the puzzle that even he didn't realize, he gets that closure, which I think a lot of people appreciated.
In fact, most of the characters get closure eventually. I know one of the bigger portions that I had a problem with early on was that it was just kind of violent. But see, then again, much like Maybell, I had never actually played the Fallout Equestria story game until recently. And then I understand that violence is just a part of the game. And therefore, when they transition it to the Pony Realm, violence is literally the answer to everything they do.
Well, it's very realistic. Not saying to say that everything in the Fallout games or Fallout Equestria is like super realistic and exactly how something would go for every person pony found in such a situation, but that's one of the things. The Fallout games did go to, like, let's make the just most horrible, gritty, world we can, and so in merging them, yes, that kind of had to come through. What I found, because I've been trying to spread the word about the story to as many of my brony friends as I can, especially ones who I know don't pay as much attention to the online community, and so I'm like, oh, there's this great story, and I know you like to read, you should check out this fan fiction. If you read no other fan fictions, you should really try this one, kind of a thing.
That's right.
Because there are lots of good fan fiction, sure, but this one is just, a lot of it is, I don't always like reading fanfics unless they're complete, because I know sometimes, just due to life, authors don't always have time to finish them.
Exactly.
And I absolutely hate being just left and with no closure to a story. I'm like, I have to know what happens. And so that's one of the, if this had been incomplete, which if it was incomplete, we probably wouldn't have all this other stuff going on, I probably wouldn't have read it, but as it was, and it's so well written, and the characters are so engaging, and you get to relate back to the show, because it actually keeps that, true to that. It's in the past, but it's clearly, it says this is what happened, why things are different from what we saw in this show. But the thing I find hardest when I'm trying to sell this to people is like, okay, Fallout, the apocalypse, everybody's cool with that. Instead of nuclear weapons, we have mega spells. That it's like, okay, and then the ponies use guns, and they're like, wait, what? How does that work?
That's what gets people, is the technical aspect of firing guns.
Not even that so much. The firing definitely comes up too, but just the concept. They're like, why would ponies even create such a thing? And of course, then their first question is usually, why would they make them? And then secondly, it's, how do they fire them? And I'm like, come on, guys. Obviously, the guns don't look how guns look for humans. They're shaped different. Seriously.
I love how they're like asking, like, why though? It's like, why do you think, like, if it's just like X-Men, if you knew there was a race of people just like you, except they had crazy magical powers, of course you would want to match them somehow. I'm surprised they didn't have more destructive guns sooner. Oh my gosh.
Sorry, I was just going to say, as pointed out by several people, in the show, in a way, guns are already in the show, because Pinkie Pie has a cannon. That's a very large gun.
Yeah, projectile weaponry of some kind, isn't it? And in fact, she uses it as a weapon against the changelings. That's canon.
Yes.
Also, they didn't cut to it. I wish they had done another bit while we're talking about it. I wish she had shot the changeling with the cannon, and then it cuts to him, and he's dressed as a clown. Like the makeup gun from The Simpsons. Like, hey, Marge, I'm going to get your makeup ready in 0.5 seconds flat. But, no, I see what you're saying.
But even still... Well, I was just saying, even still, as I explained to somebody, I said, "Come on, think about our own history. You know, as at some point, somebody once you got gunpowder and things, and eventually someone was like, let's find a way to, you know, as you said, projectile weapons." I said, eventually, let we get to a handheld version over time. I said, the ponies just did a similar evolutionary track. They did, you know, doesn't mean that the guns look the same. Yeah, they fire them with their tongues, or if a unicorn, then you know it's a lot simpler, but. It's not that hard if you really think of it. It's not that much of a stretch.
It does make you wonder if unicorns built special guns with no outside firing mechanism, so you have to pull an internal trigger with magic. That would be so awesome. It's like,
That, man,
warning,
if there
you
was
do not
ever
have
some
magic.
kind of civil war between the races, that would be sneaky.
I know, right? I'm sure that fanfic already exists, but and it would also be like you have to be a good enough unicorn to have that kind of control, because the one thing too she does develop on is unicorn magic, and how you don't just, you know, not everyone's Twilight Sparkle. More or less, you mostly just have telekinesis and maybe teleportation if you're that good. But what you were saying about of course, people would complain about guns. Like, I come from engineering school, and people love to complain about little technical details. Like, excuse me, how did the ponies fire the gun with their hooves? That doesn't make sense. And if they were in their house, then in their mouth, then how could they speak and use guns at the same time? This does not make sense. So I love those people. But even better is what you were mentioning about fanfics being completed. I'm the same way. When I finally started getting into reading fanfiction and stuff, I'm like, okay, I got to give this a try. I'm this involved in the pony fandom already. I might as well see what kind of writing they can come up with too. And I started reading End of Ponies, which is a really cool, also original apocalyptic fanfic. But then when I found out that it wasn't finished, I'm like, you know, I'm going to wait, because especially now that I've talked to people who have read it, they're like, oh man, there's all these questions I want answered. And I'm like, nope, I'm not going to invest until it's done. I've kind of always been like that, though. It's like, same thing with Project Horizons. I'm not going to crack it open until the dude finally decides he wants to wrap it, and then likely by the time someone creates an audiobook version of it after that. Because I just don't have time for normal reading, and if I did, there's a lot of non-pony stuff I'd really like to read eventually. And so that's why it took me forever until Craze Rambling finished his audiobook to actually absorb the story and get involved there.
It's the same for me. I don't like to read at home a lot, even though I'm on my computer a lot of times, but I usually have other things that I'm doing on the computer that I have set up. I need to do this week, and my workplace allows me to listen to things while at work. And oh my god, my work is horribly boring, and audiobooks are expensive. And so I've been trying to go through some of the various things that people have read, as well as intermixed with some audiobooks that I have purchased in the past. And I listen to a lot of them over and over again, especially because I'm lazy sometimes to go and find new ones. And so once I got this, I was like, for one thing, I was kind of like, oh my god, this is really long. If I had to read this, especially to sit at my computer, if I could get on my phone, which I probably could, that wouldn't be too bad.
Exactly. It's one of those things where you're like, the other problem with normal reading over, like, you know, when you don't have an entire sitting to go through a book or a novel, is that you start losing track of the beginning. Like, if I had read Fallout Equestria by hand, like, but even listening to it, by the time I got near the end, I'm like, wait, what were the first chapters like again? Like, oh yeah, God, I forgot about her, that crazy griffin. And however, I saw that they had one short printing of this where they did the hardcover bound versions of Fallout Equestria. I'd love those for like a bookshelf, and just to have them because of the amount of time already devoted into it. But I've been on this group for a second printing, but they still don't seem to be doing a second printing. So if any of you are listening, print the dang books. I want to buy it. Take my money. Just finish the stupid things.
I would probably get in on that as well. It'd be really nice to have, a few things do I feel like I need a hard copy for, but yeah, if I'm really attached to something, it's nice sometimes to see it on my shelf and think fond thoughts about the times I spent listening to it and the story of the characters. But and I was so glad to find Crazed Ramblings thing, because there's another one on YouTube. Somebody else did it too, and theirs isn't complete. So when I saw his was done, and I saw how long it was, I was like, oh yes, I will be able to listen to this at work. And it did. It took up lots and lots of time at work, But I at an 8-hour shift, and I can listen most of the shift. Yeah, it took over half a month at work to listen to all of it, which was great.
What was weird? Oh, sorry.
I was just saying, Craze Rambling does a wonderful job, and you can tell that as he did it, he got a lot better and differentiated his voices more. But by the end of it, it was just, he's a professional.
Exactly. I cannot sing his praises enough because, again, without him, I probably wouldn't have ever gone through the story. And, none of this would have happened. But, yeah, and so it was just a great service he did to, the Brony community for finishing that. And it's so funny you mentioned that. I listened to it at work, too. And so I just finished up my job here because I'm actually moving cross-country in, 3 weeks. But I was finishing up my last day at work, and I was literally walking around all these buildings because I used to work at a veterans hospital, and I would remember different parts of the story based on what I was listening to and what I was doing. I'm like, okay, here's the dermatology ward. I got to go get these final things taken care of. Oh, yeah, Dr. Glue and Dr. Slaughter. Yeah, that was a good chapter. And I'm like, wait, what? So now my brain permanently has the hospital intertwined with Fallout Equestria.
What about Old One?
Old One. What? That's a whole arc I forgot. I literally forgot the whole arc. I'm in the process of catching up to it again. Gosh,
that is one thing. It's so long. That's why I actually ended up listening to the whole story 3 times in succession.
Oh, wow. That's good.
Yeah, I really wanted to have it down. Plus, it was so good. And yeah, it was so long that, because I have a really good memory about stuff, usually. Mm-hmm. Books and stories and games and things. I usually only play through things once and don't go back for a couple of years or something because I remember it usually so well. But it's so long, by the time I finished, 3 weeks later, and I started it again, everything's almost brand new again. But that second time, I'm like, oh my God. And plus, when the second time, especially with something you really enjoy and it's just so well written like that, and you go through the second time, you're going, oh, I see all this foreshadowing and all this stuff that is getting set up, and I forgot about that. And then by the third time, it's just all gravy.
Yeah, she did some great payoffs, after the fact. She really wrapped the story.
Especially, as you guys say, to have written it in chapters, series-wise things, and to then, have everything so well planned out. Obviously, in her mind, she knew where she wanted things to go. She knew things she needed to reference, and it's just really great.
Here's a funny, talking about a fan fiction that comes from 2 properties, not a merger, a mashup of this kind. I never, this drove me into researching Fallout lore deeper. For instance, I got introduced to Fallout with Fallout 3 and the whole new push on the new systems, and a lot of people would be like, oh, you're not a true Fallout fan because you never played the first game. So I'm like, man, it's hard going back to that. It's like, even if you became a fan, say, Half-Life 2, when you go back to Half-Life 1, you feel the graphics. It's a good game, but you feel it, and it's not quite the same. Especially with Fallout, because the first 2 games weren't quite the same. But I went through all the, videos and all the deep lore about it, and I'm like, oh, wait. This whole Trixie Goddess thing is based on a Fallout 1 story arc. The Fallout 1 story arc. And I'm like, oh, wow, the Master. Oh, wow, Winnie the Pooh. It's like Jim Cummings is the voice of it. And it was very cool because it's like, I loved Fallout, and then I led into this from Fallout to Ponies, and then I went back to older Fallout. It's just this beautiful relationship.
So I was going to ask, because I started playing Fallout 3 since it was it's not the most recent since New Vegas came more recently, but it's probably the bigger one. And it was the one we found it around Christmas time. Mm-hmm. And so I started playing that, and I saw so many things almost right away. I was like, oh, that place, or, and I was just all recognizing it from the story. And then, somebody, I think one of you 2 had mentioned that there was more references to the other Fallout games, and I was like, oh my goodness. So it wasn't like she just played one game and really liked it. She obviously, K-Cat must have played all of them and just been into the entire lore to have merged them so seamlessly.
Yeah. And so for a big Fallout fan like myself, it was a lot of really good payoffs. Especially, I love the little in-jokes about the game mechanics, too. Like the fact that stim packs are freaking magic, and it's like, oh, you just shoot a stim pack and bam, healed. So it's like, okay, these are magic. Magic bandages.
I loved the jokes and things about, like, the clipboards being indestructible and everywhere.
Yes.
And the cups, the coffee cups all being pristinely white. And I like how she even put her own little backstory in the pony story as to why she explained it in their world, why they stayed pristine.
Yes, I love that kind of stuff. That was the best. And even after the fact, when I went back and started this new Fallout 3 playthrough, I got the rocket launcher, and I'd never used it before, and I'm like, man, these things really are indestructible. Decapitate super mutants with clipboards.
Yep. And you both have touched on some really good points. Natural progression, loss of innocence, decay, but what about the characters? Personally, I want to focus on them for just a little bit, since this is kind of what really makes the story the story. And we start with the main character, Little Pip. And, obviously the whole story is told from her point of view. And we don't find out until the end that from her point of view, this all happened in the past, up until the very end when she's recording again. Which is sort of like a nice, like you said before, a nice tie-in for her, but there are some points about her that really touch home base with a lot of people. And I think that's why a lot of people like Little Pip. Not only is she the hero, but she has that lethal curiosity at times.
I think any good hero, really, and any main character, you need to have a lot of curiosity. You can have a side character do it, but I think it's more fun when it's your main character. Your main character is usually not the sensible one. In any story, the main character is usually the more reckless and curious, explorative person, and it gets things done that way, though. It sets everything out. Oh, we just stumbled across this and this, and by God, I'm going to set things right, which is almost exactly how she starts out. She stumbles across the whole concept of slavers in a town of slavers, and she's like, nope, I am not settling for this. That is not right. We are going to fix this.
Exactly. It's
It's curiosity and justice. Now you go.
Yeah, it's classic fish out of water storytelling. Just like Fallout 3, how it did it so well is that you're introduced into this small, compact world, and you have these shadows of what the world was and what everything was, and then she's literally thrown out into the wasteland, into the midst of it, and you discover things as she discovers things. And, it's really like... it's just like the original Star Wars, where it's not really complex storytelling. Like, it's effective because she builds all these characters and she weaves a lot of plot threads together effectively, but there's a lot of, like, basic tropes and things that she gravitated to, which, personally, I like, because a lot of those tried and true tropes work because everyone knows that they work, and they're good at connecting people to a story and characters.
Well, it's like the whole fish out of water thing. Some of that is really good. It's the reason it works so well is, especially when starting a new thing, which granted this, in a way, this story isn't new depending on which fandom you came from, either from the Fallout side or the MLP side or both. You already know a lot of stuff going in, but for those like me that didn't know anything about the Fallout side, when I was first listening to it, the fish out of water thing always helps introduce you because it gives characters a reason for exposition and explaining stuff because the character in the story doesn't know, and so they have to ask, well, what's going on? And then their characters can explain. Because sometimes it always does feel kind of weird in stories where the characters are already part of something, and then somebody has to explain, and you're like, well, if they live here, wouldn't they already know? But with the fish out of water thing, it's perfectly reasonable for them to want to know, well, what's going on, why?
It's like, oh my gosh, we have this small, annoying pony who keeps bugging us for information. Her and that dang hitbox of hers. It's interesting that you mentioned both fandoms, though, because one thing I've come across in doing parodies is that the hardcore, well, I shouldn't say hardcore, the Fallout fans that are not pony fans, they are probably the most vitriolic of all the kinds of haters I've seen out there. And they're usually also the kind of people, like I mentioned earlier, they're like, oh, you never played the first Fallout game, so you're not a real fan. I would argue that by not at least giving Fallout Equestria a chance, they are not real fans. is, because fan fiction has literally preserved franchises in the past. One of the most famous instances of it was one of the earliest instances of fan fiction was Sherlock Holmes. After Sir Arthur Conan Doyle finished his books, I think he actually finished his books. Like, I think Sherlock Holmes ends up dead or something.
Yes.
All these people wrote fan fiction about it, and they were publishing non-canon works, and, you know, there was all these early copyright laws trying to deal with it. But the fact is that they maintained the character, and they kept the stories alive. If it weren't for them, fanfic writers of the early days. And so anyway, so I think a lot of people underestimate it. They think of all fan fiction as like very cheap, terribly written like ship fics, basically like, oh, you know, and then Spock and Kirk kiss, and then the green alien shows up, and it's like, you know, of course there's always going to be stuff like that. It's like how there's always going to be Rule 34 for any fandom. It's just, but when you see real art, when you see real value come out of people because they love something, it has value in and of itself. You could argue it's the same way with Fallout 3 and New Vegas. The producers, the game developers, were fans of the Interplay games, and so when they finally took the helm, when it was their property and their turn to continue the story, they were fans, and they were developing the story as they loved and as they wanted to.
Which kind of helps explain how Little Pip sort of has the traits of both the original hero from Fallout 1, the stable dweller, as she's called, and some traits of the characters from Fallout 3 and from the Steel Rangers game, because she sort of embodies all three of those main story characters. She wants to help other ponies, she is the Lightbringer, and her Wasteland Virtuous sacrifice.
Speaking of, with Little Pip and with, I forget, something you said made me think of this, though, but I thought it was really nice, especially, it kind of also works from the MLP side and the fanfics. So many fanfics, so many people, want to pair the main six together for various reasons, and there's an ongoing thing about, there's so many mayors in the society, there would, they can't do it in a kids' TV show, but a lot of people just accept that there's probably a lot of homosexuality in the show, and here we're given a story with a homosexual main character.
That's true.
You mean the lesbian horse Jesus?
Yes.
That was probably the funniest term that someone had given her. I think I saw it as a meme at one point. But yeah, it was a great character arc because everyone, Little Pip develops and she comes into her own. She comes from a really rocky home life with an alcoholic mother, and this is starting to sound more like Stephen King the more I talk about it. Oh, an alcoholic in a Stephen King story? And so, yes, of course. So obviously, just like any good story, she has to go through internal conflicts as well, and dealing with her addiction to mint owls and all these fun things, and dealing with her, sort of celebrity love of Velvet, and then developing a real, genuine friendship with her. It was very good, very fun.
I will say I did think it was almost a little, and obviously we all wanted, but to a certain degree it's almost a little too much of a happy ending, that she actually does find someone for her so easily to be her own, true love. It's a little, not to be all like cynical and pessimistic, but it's kind of, in the real world things don't usually work out that happily. But I'm still glad she does find someone. And yeah, exactly. She has her crush on Velvet Remedy, and eventually, she learns that. You
mean Ahmed shows up a little too conveniently, and she even looks kind of similar to her? Yeah, I can get that. Like, for me though, maybe I misinterpreted the ending. Is she locked inside the weather control chamber indefinitely, or can she get out for like holiday and visits and stuff? Because it kind of sounded like the former when I read it, but I don't know. Maybe I've misinterpreted.
I wondered about that too. I didn't know if she was literally trapped in the stasis or just trapped in the command center.
I didn't understand that.
Burning alive to leave would probably not be good.
I was kind of under the impression that she could choose to join and set like release dates and times, because in the end it's like her and Homage are kind of together in the epilogue, but then again the epilogue takes 10 years in the future, so we don't really understand or ever given a result to that, which is kind of why there's totally a need for a sequel. But Speaking of that, let's go back to Velvet Remedy. She is the most interesting character.
Okay.
She is basically the reason that Little Pip even leaves the stable. She has this whole she was a caged bird scenario, if anyone wants to agree or disagree with that. And
No,
I agree with her caged bird. I don't know that I agree with she's the most interesting character.
Oh, snap. She is not best pony, obviously. No, continue, Clockwork.
well, I mean, there are just so many things about Velvet that make her both interesting and sort of confusing at times. Like, she really does represent kindness in the end. She is the medical pony after a while. But her wasteland virtue is love. And, I mean, she loves every pony. She loves the hellhounds. She loves the griffins. She loves the goddess. I mean, she just has this pour out of unconditional love, but don't cross her because she will use and abuse you to get her way. She kind of reminds me of a couple gold digging type characters I've read about in the past, except for instead of money and fame, she just wants to help. And she'll use any means necessary, even if it means lying outright to other ponies.
I thought their wasteland virtue was their virtue was their element of harmony. I never really thought of them as having two separate virtues.
Every character has a virtue, which took me a really long time to get, even though someone had given me some of the early ones. And then their virtue is what they stand for in the Wasteland, because in the Fallout games, especially, you never played Fallout 2, but in Fallout 2, you were given a choice of a virtue to follow. And the end result of the game will tell you what your Wasteland virtue was. I figured she was following that same codex because they all have a Wasteland virtue. Little Pip is sacrificed. Zenith is human.
I guess, because when Spike, originally, as first introduces himself to Little Pip, he's like, you have to find your virtue. The greatest heroines in history each represented one of the great virtues, and he lists the elements of harmony. And so their element of harmony was their virtue. So I guess I didn't think it would be a separate thing.
I just assumed, maybe she forgot about that when she was writing it, but honestly, I just assumed because Monterey Jack had a virtue.
Yeah, exactly, and so did Little Pip, even though Little Pip wasn't one of the elements.
Element bearers.
Well, he says that there are other, when he's giving that first explanation, and that could be that maybe, she deviated from that a little bit or something, because I didn't know about the Fallout 2 thing. This
is some deep lore we shouldn't cut.
He's like, the great heroines, they represented these virtues, and you have to find your virtue. And he says, in so many words, I forget his exact wording, but he says, these aren't the only virtues, but, you have to find your virtue.
Yeah, maybe this is like magical levels. Like, the elements are the 6 virtues that got, like, enough magical build or whatever over the years that they became these, like, rune stones or whatever. Also, Velvet was the element of kindness, right? At the end?
Yeah. And kindness is a form of love, so that just seems kind of... And loyalty and honor... Well, loyalty and honor is separate, but... if she wanted to do it that way, that's fine. I guess I'm just confused by what it seems like they don't need to be 2 separate things. I thought they were one and the same. Their wasteland virtue is their virtue, which is their element. Was the way I thought of it.
That would definitely be great for fanfic writers, because this is like, and then my character showed up, which is the element of super awesomeness. Yes.
That's a Rainbow Dash. Come on.
Yeah, I know. Ministry of Awesome. Only someone with Twilight Sparkle as a connection could get away with that. Hello, sir. I'd like to create a new Department of Defense Department. Yes, and what department would that be? Oh, the Department of Super Space Lasers? No. But my brother is Joe Biden. Crap. Okay, Department of Space Lasers.
And, Velvet herself is just really, really interesting. She has that bitch moment, and for any kids listening, I'm sorry, but she really does have that moment. But she also goes into, like, this loving mother scenario, and really she's the pinnacle of what you expect from a nurse. She has to be firm when she has to be firm and when she cares about other ponies, but she has to be absolutely true to herself, too, because kindness and love, while they are technically 2 separate things, because in the Fallout universe, especially if you played all the way through Fallout 2, in the very end, when you beat the game, you're given a virtue, and there are like 20 virtues that you could have accomplished throughout the game. Her virtue is definitely love. but her harmony is kindness.
Shoot, I didn't even know that was based on Fallout 2. I just learned something right now.
So, since we were talking about not best pony, what's your favorite pony, Maybelle?
I don't ever like to, say somebody's not best pony for someone else. But, so if someone else thinks that, I know a lot of people do like Velvet, and she is a well-rounded character. But my favorite is Calamity.
Aww.
And maybe that's some kind of gender bias on me, being heterosexual and liking male characters.
Girls don't like other girls, that's a fact.
I know. But, well, some of it is he's, I don't want to say he's sometimes, I'll admit, a little, too good. Sometimes he doesn't have too many faults. He has a few, granted, but he is, he's so honorable, and he's a gentleman, and he's chivalrous, and all these really nice, awesome things that, usually girls like to see in a guy. He definitely has, despite that, he has baggage from his past that, but for the first half of the book, he's kind of always just the one being pulled along by the drama from Little Pip, from Velvet Remedy, and even a little bit from Steelhooves. And then come the end half, we finally start learning more about him, and he does finally get more well-rounded as we learn what he actually went through. But still, he also is like, he came from a household that the entire household was like military, we must do exactly what the government says, and everything down below is bad, and we are good. And he, of course, just throws everything he's learned his entire life, to the wayside and goes, nope, y'all are wrong. And since, you guys won't, listen to reason, I'm leaving. Bye. And he goes down to help all the ponies of the wasteland. And so he's a little too good to be true in some of those aspects. But I can't help it.
No, that's definitely reasonable.
Plus, Craze Rambling's voice for him is just so nice. But
I was going to say, I was waiting for you to describe him like a Cosmopolitan article, like, oh yes, he's mid-20s, very
Little Pip is never actually physically described in the book. Huh?
That's true, though. There is a lot of play in terms of eye color. I think that's basically a fan interpretation. Most people have settled on green. I like the green because it looks nice.
It makes sense because it goes with the Pip-Buck screen color.
Yes, exactly. Some people prefer the yellow, though, and they prefer to have her with more like reddish auburn hair than like the darker brown.
And one thing I know between her, just because most fans have settled on the gray and the brown color scheme for her, and with Calamity being rust and orange, and Velvet Remedy being charcoal and white, and Steelhose basically being gray because he has no outward color for us to physically look at through most of it because he's wearing the armor.
Some people speculate he was green, like a what's a good
well,
character?
it does say that he was green.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like colors were
described.
described.
You don't see him that much.
Yeah.
Well, what we see of him, he's in armor. So the whole group, and it's very symbolic of everything that's happened to the world, is so much of the color has left the world because of the downfall of the society and everything. And so with our main group of characters, we no longer have the bright, happy, candy colors that we're used to in the show. Everybody's more drab,
Yes.
and it's
That
very
is an excellent point. Sorry.
No, that's
No, that is an excellent point because that's another thing K-Cat touches on that is like, the whole idea of cutie marks and like discovering what your like destined thing to be best at is a lot driven of what you end up like, what you're good at and like what you pursue, ironically. And so then you get all these really scary explanations of raiders with these horrific cutie marks about death and murdering or cannibalism or whatever. And it's very like, I thought that was one of the like more subtle like better written portions of the story, was that just again not just decay of the world itself but decay of the of the soul of its citizens, and they're all getting these darker, more like violent red colors and, you know, yellowish eyes. I think the Raiders are described as having at one point. It's just, wow. It's hard to swallow.
It is.
Yeah. But
And-
yes, so we have deviated a little bit, but I think it was a good point to make. I wanted to mention it at some point about the color thing. But back on Calamity, it's kind of interesting that he has the cowboy stereotype since he's a Pegasus. And and it's very nice that she worked in, you know, the only male cowboy. Well, I guess, you know, we have Brayburn too. But with Big Mac, who we know, and his trademark yups and nopes. So I thought it was really nice to have those in there. And the cowboy hat, since we're used to a main character wearing one and he gets to wear one. It's kind of nice to see. It keeps us kind of in the feel of what we know from the show, even if it's on a different character than we're used to seeing it on. And in the end, it turns out that he is the element of harmony. He represents loyalty.
No surprise there.
Yeah, and it's one of those things one could argue that because he left the Pegasi above and came down below, it doesn't seem very loyal to them. But at the same time, it's a loyalty, and with his wasteland virtue, he is honor. And I guess that's because this isn't one I had worked out, but Clockwork has said that there's like honor must have been one of the 20 choices at the end of Fallout 2.
Yeah.
I'll have to see a list of all those different choices.
I gotta play that now. I've got the games on my computer. I just haven't sat down and. But no, it's like you were saying. Like his loyalty is actually deeper seated than the rest of the Pegasi, because Calamity ultimately was loyal to Equestria, same as Rainbow Dash. That's why he became a Dashite, and they branded him and all that. It was because he didn't want the rest of the world to just die below their artificially propped up cloud habitat, because that's the thing, is they were literally selfishly keeping the rest of the wasteland from life and rejuvenation and sunlight and these massive weather and, you know, terraformation towers, just for their own purposes. And so he was definitely a loyal character. And even with Little Pip, how, you know, he stuck with her. He was, I'd say, her best friend throughout the whole series of the novel.
Oh, yes. He doesn't have to even think about it when it's asked of him, you know, do you trust Little Pip? And he's just like, yes. You know, and a lot of that is, you know, his loyalty is there right from the beginning. But also, as with his wasteland virtue being honor, it's not just loyalty, because you can be loyal, but you can be loyal in not the right way. And he knows what's just and what's right. And in the, you know, for honor, he sees that what his fellow Pegasi were doing was wrong, and he makes the right choice, even though it's hard, and he has to leave home, and he suffers the consequences of being branded a Dashite for it, but he knows he's doing what's right, and he's helping the ponies below, even if it means leaving behind his family. Most of them kind of jerks, but
yeah, probably that wasn't too hard. Okay, bye, Pride. I guess you can't beat up on me anymore.
Yeah, I know. They did. It's one of those things where sometimes, you know, family is not always, you know, really nice to you, but when it really comes down to, even with some of the worst family members, they don't always family members don't always, you know, they're not always really nice to you. They pick on you, and this and that. But when it comes down to it, there's still a tie there. And we see that with two of his brothers that are still willing to help him out, even with
That's true.
all the bad blood between them. But then you can still have those family members that nothing's going to set them straight. And that's where we get, you know, one of our big villains of the whole thing in Autumn Leaf.
And, you know, speaking of virtues and morality, one other function I really loved that Calamity and Velvet served was they were sort of different paths of morality during the course of the story. Like, especially during the Arbu story arc, how you sort of have like a bait and switch, how Little Pip has this impression of how the two are going to react to the justice that she served in Arbu, and here they end up having quite the opposite opinion. And that that's what fascinated me, is that they both, they're both very moral, and they both really want to do the best that they can for the wasteland, but they have absolutely opposite approaches of doing so. Velvet's idea is, the ultimate nurse. She's the ultimate healer and try to literally approach things directly from the healing perspective, whereas Calamity is, you need to surgically remove the the cancerous parts of the wasteland, which is all these sick and deranged raiders and pretty much anyone else that is only seems to be intending harm for the land and to keep the wasteland as deranged and sick as it is. So I thought it was very cool.
That's something that even Velvet, by the end, she comes to, I don't know if it's agree, because agree sounds too like positive, but she admits, I guess that's better, that the raiders and the things like that they when she finally does, shoot some of them, and she goes, I haven't killed a pony, and I still haven't, because they really
aren't ponies.
Yeah, they aren't ponies anymore. They've given up that right to be something. Because they're monsters now, basically. No one can do to their fellow pony what these ponies are doing. It's just because they do horrible, brutal, disgusting things. And I agree with Velvet Remedy on that. They've lost their humanity in a way, but this is their, I don't know what the pony word for that is.
What the pony word for it? Yeah, no, exactly. It's like everyone is given the same chance of, the same humanity. They have the same agency. They have the same choices. Of course, everyone comes from a different background, but that doesn't change that life is all about your choices and your decisions. And so then, at the point when they've decided that they want to rob other people of their life and their, chance to live on and be who they want to be, they've given up their own right as well. And so then they need to see justice at the end of a shotgun barrel. But yeah, and now, okay, so I guess we've seen who your two favorite ponies are, Velvet and Calamity, quite oppositely, which is very, very nice. For me, and this could be coming from the perspective of someone who likes Applejack as best pony in the normal show, and probably still, especially actually including Fallout Equestria, because all the main six get their own separate developments and arcs in Fallout Equestria as well. And I think the strongest arc, because it has the most direct tie on the present events, is Applejack and Steel Hooves. And I actually, of course, love their story the best, and so Steel Hooves would probably be my favorite Fallout Equestria pony. And it's just so, it's just so heartbreaking, the story they go through and the decisions Steel Hooves has to make and the sort of regrets he has to live with, thinking that he had ultimately just destroyed her on the inside and ultimately just reduced her down to staying with him, even though he thought he was a monster, even though he thought he was totally undeserving of love or happiness. And so really him becoming a ghoul and living on and, serving his Steel Ranger function is almost like penance, is almost like a purgatory for him. He felt like he had to continue fighting this fight that Applejack couldn't. And by being, the symbol of the old world, the symbol of what ponies should aspire to be, even when the actual Steel Rangers started deviating from it. I thought that was just so heartbreaking that he had almost given up himself. He had almost given up his own agency to just serving of the function of continuing on her dream, continuing on her vision for how to fix the wasteland or how to fix the world that was dying around them. And so then when you get the closure to the arc, when you start seeing Applejack's memory orbs and seeing that she still cared about him, that she fought almost tooth and nail to get out of the vault to go and find him, or the stable too, to go and find him, it was heartbreaking. And learning about the pregnancy and learning the fact that heck, even Little Pip could be related to Applejack because of the family trees and 200 years of, interbreeding within a small population pool.
I think that's one of the things that I almost expect that K-Cat intends for that to be taken that way, because it's set up in there that we don't know who Little Pip's dad is, so were a little bit lost onto, some of her family tree, and I think that was almost just done on purpose so that it could come down to it, because she also then, by the end, equates herself to Steelhooves, to Apple Snack, when she's dealing with Autumn Leaf. She's like, I'm not Red Eye, I'm Apple Snack, and she ends up doing almost the exact same thing that he did in the past to protect her love, her element of honesty.
Honesty, quote unquote. Everyone still thinks she should be the element of loyalty, but no, exactly. And for me, I feel like that was part of it too, is that even though it's not like heavily implied, the fact that, say, Little Pip is a direct descendant of Applejack, that brings out the closure for Steelhooves. The fact that not only does she connect with Applejack like through her memories, but the fact that she could be blood relative, and that he finally gets that closure. He finally gets that redemption and can then move on, so that his death is like he can finally join her in the afterlife. That I thought that was the most touching, and that the feels, man. I felt the feels. So, yeah.
Well, and Little Pip mentions that for her, even though with Calamity and Velvet Remedy being part of the elements of harmony and having their element, and then alongside that having their wasteland virtue, even though Lil Pip herself doesn't turn out to be an element of harmony, she has a virtue, and then Steelhooves has a virtue, and his is perseverance, because he's persevered through so much.
He walked that lonely road, the only road that he had ever known.
And there are times where he has this, and I hate to say it, but he's kind of suicidal.
Yeah.
Well, who wouldn't be depressed after 200 years, knowing that everyone you know is gone, and that you think for all that time that your love chose to leave you in that darkest hour when things went bad?
Yeah. He thought she had abandoned him, rejected him completely, and so he had this maintained mindset that he was a monster and trying to redeem himself in, quote unquote, the afterlife for him, like his new life as a ghoul after being changed and like sealed inside the armor too, which is like literally he felt like he was sentenced to carry on her dream as a Steel Ranger, both literally and physically. And oh man, see, so that's why I feel like he had the best arc. I feel like he had the most emotionally impacting and like the hardest development. I mean, of course, there's Little Pip, which I'm sure we're going to get to her shortly, but yeah. So I really loved the Steelhooves arc.
I don't know. Steelhooves, to me, he felt sort of like that soldier character who's seen way too much death and darkness, and he doesn't know how to return to society, so he kept in the death and darkness, because that's all he ever knew, until he met Little Pip, in which case then he started lightening up, he changed a little bit, he sort of started gaining a sense of humor, and towards the end, right before he died, he was true to his word. He would protect her up until the point, and then he gets his head sliced off, and then it doesn't go pretty for him. Hopefully, maybe he gets a lightsaber kind of moment in the future, but I don't see that happening. Fanfiction writers, get on that.
You mean the best line in the whole story? What, are we on a date?
Yes.
I know, that was wonderful.
Oh man, yeah, you're right. No, Steelhooves, he had some of the best like joke moments because he's just the straight character. Well, not like he's played so straight, and he's such a serious character.
Well, yeah, like Applejack's family never hogs stubbornize.
Yeah, but speaking of straight, that's another function that he served in the story, is he showed the development of the characters we know. The fact that they grew and they became, older ponies, and they had development of themselves. They had their love interests that aren't Flash, Flash Sentry stealing everyone's waifus. But they had that development. They had that growth beyond the story that we had known, beyond, season 1 and the beginning of season 2. You see Apple Bloom and them form Stapletech and forming the corporation, growing and developing and having to go through the family issues and the battle. And that's the other thing, is that, Applejack's function in the show has always been that connection of family, connecting to Big Mac and Apple Bloom and all these other characters. And so that really rang true in the whole, the battle with Brayburn and dealing with Big Mac's death and how that death served as a function of the story. I thought that was really good. I thought that was really effective.
One thing I'm confused about, you mentioned Brayburn, is the statuettes that the story has, not the show. Which when I started playing Fallout 3, I was like, oh, these are like the bobbleheads. That's kind of neat.
Exactly.
And I saw where that worked in. And then I really liked how they actually gave them a background, though, in the story. Giving them a magical background and why they were indestructible. But, each of the main 6 got a set and stuff. And then they ended up dividing them up, sending them to friends and family and things. And, one would definitely assume that the one that Steelhooves had came from Applejack. So who sent the one to Brayburn?
Yeah, I don't know. I remember the Radio Who's Equestrian Broadcasting Network. They had that little side story called One Shot Apple. Their little like mini episode thing talking about that. And I think the Brayburn one was like Big Mac's or something. I don't know. But
Big Mac didn't get a set.
That's right. Yeah. So I don't know. That's probably just one of those little details that got lost to the wayside. Okay. Well, anyway, so yeah, we're talking about characters and Steelhooves.
We should go on to the rest of the
cast.
We're already gonna have to edit right around this spot, so I figure because we ought to go into like Zenith and Pyrelight and.
We do have to get to that.
If we get the rest of these
dang ponies taken care of, and then we have to finish with our Wasteland hero, obviously. But Zenith is a good point. All right, starting here. Speaking of which, Zenith is another character that got added in after the fact. Steelhooves we meet somewhere around chapter, I think, 7, where they come across his frozen body because his suit's spell matrix got shut down, which would have been an awful span of time to be living.
He shows up and they fight alicorns, and the alicorn hits him with lightning or something that shuts down his spell matrix.
Exactly.
Yeah. He gets disabled while fighting the alicorns, the 3 that appear that for some reason are targeting little Pip in the beginning, which I did not figure that out.
Yeah, I know. It's like she already had a sense that, she was gonna matter somehow, the goddess.
Well, and they're just ticked about the whole thing with the slaves and that first alicorn that little Pip crushed with a boxcar.
Oh, that was so good.
Oh, wow. I forgot about that because she learned how to lift from Crane.
Yeah, yeah. She became a magical little pony herself.
Uh-huh.
Oh. Yeah, it's it was good the way he got introduced. But yeah, and then upon discovering Zenith in the Philadelphia, that was a really good arc too, because obviously for anyone who's played the game, you get all those the pit feels from Fallout 3, but just like you experience it more directly, like all what the slaves are really going through, and the weight, like the battle and everything, and that was a really good escape. That was actually probably one of my favorite like action scenes in the story, was the escape from Philadelphia. How they're like literally like on amusement park rides and they ride a roller coaster out of there, and that was awesome. I can't wait to get to animating that, or that part of the animation to come up.
And
putting the two of them together, Zenith and Steelhooves, they kind of have their own little, obviously far from romance, but they have a connection of their own, a rivalry, just because Steelhooves was alive back in the war, and is very, and just because of everything went down with him and Zecora and
oh my gosh,
fighting the zebras, he's very distrustful of zebras just because they're zebras. And so even though now here we are 200 years from that war, coming across a zebra in the wasteland, he's immediately like, nope, don't trust her.
Better white than striped.
Well, and the other thing about Zenith that makes her so interesting is that they expand on zebras. K-Cat did a wonderful job of really taking what I call shamanistic elements and kind of applying it to the MLP universe. For one thing, they're not just shamans, they're necrourgists, necromancers, alchemists, and they have this whole plethora of things that they can do with their potions. The other thing about it is they have this mythology about the stars, which is a very shamanistic feeling to it. Zenith even before we learned about the Star Blaster, Zenith has this thing about how the stars are evil and the stars align to destroy all life on Equestria. That right there just makes her so totally different than the ponies themselves, because they had Celestia and Luna, and she and her people have the religion of the stars and the worlds of spirits. That really makes her kind of alien in a way, but at the same time really, really, really integrated, because she's sort of like a great descendant of Zecora without actually being related.
You know, I wish she had expanded on that a little more. Like, she does a pretty good job of covering it, but I wanted to see more, like, you know, star metal weapons in action. That was really cool.
And, you know, Zenith's major flaw is the fact that she was abused.
Yeah.
And, you know, first she was abused by her husband. Then she was abused by the people that captured ponies that captured her. Then
see, that does make it kind of creepy sounding. That is probably the hardest thing. I'm sorry.
Then she was abused in the pit because she had to fight every day for her life. She couldn't talk because she knew the second she talked she might be killed. She did what she had to for survival. And eventually she kind of learns a virtue of humility.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you first meet her, you kind of feel that she has the mentality of a follow-along. She'll do whatever happens because someone's rescued her or someone's done something for her, and that's what she's supposed to be. She doesn't seem to have a mind of her own or a will of her own for a very long time. Yeah, and in a way you feel sorry for her because she sort of has... And I know a lot of people got angry about it because I heard a lot of hate mail. She sort of has the slave mentality. Yeah. Which, being a zebra, in the human world, that equates to being African-American. Or just African outright. And I have to remind people that that's not totally true, because she's not a slave. No point in any of the story does she, aside from when she's in the pit, does she come off as being a slave. She comes off as being a willing servant to Little Pip, because she feels that she owes her for freeing her.
And I never really thought of her as having this... I mean, I can see where the people would say that, but I never really thought of her that way, because in my mind, she's a very strong woman character. You know, she's knows how to take care of herself. She's, you know, but yeah, I thought it was, a lot of it was just how she was raised, and I thought it was a very nice contrasting society to what the ponies had, which is part of why, you know, ponies and zebras probably fought in the first place. When you have societies that differ so much, it just makes it easier to create sparks and friction between them. And so that differing society where men are highly, you know, or males are highly in charge, and the women are, you know, to do their duties, and that's how it was, just for, well, I mean, just in a human society, you know, just not too long ago, we had that same thing. You know, the women did what their husbands told them to do, and the women stayed home and they cooked and things like that. And that wasn't that, you know, all that different for humans, no matter what race. Not that long ago, really, in the grand scheme of things. And so that's just kind of the society she was raised in. Was she listened to her? The husband was in charge of the family, and she did what he said. And a lot of that's just the way she was raised. And then we look at her daughter, who wants nothing to do with that way of thinking, but she got, in a way, raised a completely different way because her parents were taken away when she was quite young, and she learned to become very independent in order to survive. And a lot of that stuff is just taught so young that once it's in your mentality, but I never thought of Zenith as weak for it. She was still a very strong character.
In fact, like, I get the idea of people thinking she has, like, this slave mentality. I didn't feel that as much. I felt like maybe a more valid claim would be that she has sort of like a rape victim mentality, because, you know, she was one, and of course she's very sensitive to anyone touching or coming near her, not just Steel Hooves for his, you know, existing biases and such. So I feel like those claims would be more valid. But more than anything, I always just felt that, you know, obviously these things were all aspects of her personality, all parts of her history, and so they just contributed to an already strong sense of independence. I always thought of her more like Michonne, I think her name is, from The Walking Dead, where she's just like, you know, she exists on her own, and she's stuck in this, you know, apocalyptic wasteland and deal with her own lost family and everything, but more so than anything, like, she wouldn't want to become part of a group. She would want to deal with things on her own terms and in her own way. And, of course, a badass in her own right.
That's true. Well, I think we should move on to the next major character in the story. Firelight!
Really? No, I guess she is a major character.
Well, she has a major role at certain points. She helps beef up Little Pip's worries at one point. She's always there around Velvet, and she's always there around every other character. And
she's the Momo of the story.
She basically is. She is the Momo of the entire Fallout Equestria story, because they don't meet her until, what is it, they go to Manhattan for the first time?
I see. That's another part I forget. I forgot how they found her. She was just along for the ride at one point.
Just while they're wandering around Manhattan, and that Velvet Remedy rescued her from
the Manicores.
Bloodwings.
Bloodwings, one of the two.
Oh yeah.
But Little Pip makes a big point, especially after the Philadelphia incident, that Firelight is a full-fledged, so to speak, a member of the group. Not to be, discounted as a pet or anything. She is just as much a member as anybody. They ask things of her. She, can consent or not, decide on her own. And not to mention, I thought it was really interesting what they did, to take the Phoenix doesn't react the same way to fire that other things do, but she was still affected by it. And now instead of just being a Phoenix of fire, being a Balefire Phoenix, was a really interesting. I thought that was very interesting to take on things.
Creating cool-looking fan art aplenty.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how about we've talked about the main six of the story. Well, often one main six. Then we have to talk about the villains of the story and the side characters. So why don't we speak about the villains? How about you take us off there, SkyBolt?
Well, obviously, as everyone knows, I'd say the main villain of the story is Red Eye. Even though they kind of take care of him before the end of the final story, he's the most present character. He's the most foreboding force in the Wasteland, because obviously, like, the final arc is that you have to defeat the Enclave. But even when the Enclave is invading, even when they're making their last ditch effort to maintain control of the Ministry of Awesome towers, he's still there exerting his will over them. Like, they're trying to put up a fight, but with his dragon and the resources that he's amassed over his just will drip. A lot of people compare him, or at least I've heard a lot of comparisons of him to the Governor, again, from Walking Dead, because I've been watching that, so it's on my brain, on my mind, in the fact that he comes from Stable 101, which is a nice little plug, a reference to Vault 101, and that the experiment of that stable was the sort of like the Earth Pony superiority complex, which was really interesting. And so even though he was an Earth Pony himself, he got this frame of reference that, like, no, there is no, like, perfect race. In fact, they're all necessary. And he got this idea not only of the equality, which is actually kind of a good idea, and that's one thing that they explore in the story too, is he's used as another frame of moral reference. Not like I've discussed with Velvet and Calamity and their different takes on the morality. Little Pip has a really serious time thinking that what he's actually doing, as many bad things like, means justify the ends, decisions that he's going through is actually productive. He's actually building a new economic system, and he's really putting together the first vestiges of a government besides the individual stables that the Wasteland has seen in 200 years. And so, as a villain, that's very important to give credence, to at least give some inkling of why the villain's doing what they're doing, besides just someone coming on the scene like a mustache twirler, like, oh, I am evil, and I'm going to take over the world because I want to, and it's going to be mine. Of course, he does have that self-centered aspect of things, and he's a villain because he's sacrificing so many ponies to that end to serve his purpose in the grand unity of things. But yeah, so I feel like he was a very good villain because of that. Because he was always a present force, even though in person, in Pony, you only see him for like 4 chapters of the book near the end. He's always that voice on the radio. He's always that, that presence in the wasteland, which I thought, like the Emperor from Star Wars, made him one of the better characters.
So that kind of, makes me think of Sombra. But, because that's like, of course, Red Eye at least talks a lot more.
Yeah, besides crystals,
Yeah.
slaves.
But yeah, he was such because he wasn't just like evil for evil's sake kind of a thing. He had a plan, and he actually, and like Little Pip, like you said, she admits a lot of what he's doing is going to be helpful, getting the factories running and things. He's just going about it the wrong way by enslaving ponies. It'd be better to get everything up and running, but have it be, people just working to get things together to help everybody, and for them wanting to do it rather than, let's beat them into submission and work them to death to make it come about.
Yeah.
But, like you said, it's one thing I found interesting, because, so many people sometimes, there's not as many Earth Pony OCs in the fandom, and sometimes people are like, well, an Earth Pony is just, Pegasus, you can fly, Unicorn, you can do magic. What's the Earth Pony got? And even now that, after season 3 and everything, where it's definitely been established that the Earth Pony thing is their strength, it's kind of just like, but then to see him in this story, I thought was so nice because it gave the Earth Ponies, and it makes sense, and K-Cat even references to the show and things, especially where Pinkie Pie built weird contraptions,
Yes.
that their own technological, it's not the same as the magical advances that, like, the unicorns can do, but the Earth Ponies will build more just non-magical things, but the technological advances that they'll come out of from that they will strive to find ways, like farm equipment. Almost all the farmers and food growers in the show and things are Earth Ponies because they just have more of an attunement with the environment and for growing things. And so they, obviously, who's going to be making a lot of their equipment? They are. So those kind of technological advances. And then to have him come from a stable that's basically kind of Earth Pony supremacist mindset. And, but in a way, I was like, well, see there, I don't think they should think that they're better than everybody else, but Earth Ponies definitely, I don't see why that can't be canon. It makes perfect sense,
Exactly.
that they have their technological advances. They are in no way inferior to the other 2 races. They bring their own thing to the table, and especially considering that K-Cat wrote this, as we said, up to, maybe the beginning of season 2 kind of time frame, that she was already on top of the fact that alicorns encompass all 3 races, which most of the fandom couldn't agree upon until just after season 3, when show people and stuff were admitting to it and agreeing to it or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
With the whole Twilacorn stuff, it was like, wow, K-Cat's on top of stuff here, guys. Jeez, listen to this lady.
Yeah,
She's
and this
got
is
it all
even
spelled out.
Yeah, and this is even before the Hearthswarming episode came out that described the history of Equestria being based on basically a racial war between the 3 races. And so this literally predates all that, because I believe she finished the story in December of 2011.
I think K-Cat is a prophet.
Which is really impressive if you think about it, that she wrote this 600-page story over the course of only 6 months. Like, what the heck, George R.R. Martin? Where's the next book? So
that is some motivation.
No kidding. That is some serious drive, and you feel the passion when you read.
It's hard. Anybody that tries to write knows writing is hard, and I think sometimes other people that maybe aren't as big into writing and things, it is very hard to be motivated to put all that out. And so if not just for the fact that the story itself is amazing, to see some of the things that she did, kept in canon with the show, even predicting things of the show, and so that everything still fits together. And now I didn't know how long it is. Now you told me it took her about 6 months to do this. She's going to be one of my most respected people on Earth.
It's impressive, and I think I have the time frame right there. But it's like we were talking about. She really does develop the mentality of the races, and with it too, in really exceptional ways if you think about it. Because you have this idea about the Pegasi sort of. They literally secede from the Union. It's almost like they quit Equestria when everything was going down, like the frickin' Confederacy or something. And Yeah, I mean, just developing into the whole, like, of course, every race has their own supremacy thing, at least the Pegasi did, and then this, part of the experiment with the Earth ponies, and the legitimate idea that if these were a real society, that the Earth ponies would have to be extra industrious and more ingenuitive because they didn't have those natural bonuses, those natural superiorities, quote unquote, that the Pegasi unicorns have. So they have to be more industrious. They have to make more technologies and be smarter about the way they work and live because they don't have the advantages of wings or horns.
That's very, very true. And, I think, though, that everyone forgets one thing. K-Cat did go back after Season 3 and re-edited stuff right before Craze Rambling, or Rambler, however you say his screen name, actually went and recorded the whole thing. Because he has a thing on one of his YouTube videos that he was reading the second edition that was written and rewritten in March 2012. And again, the ending, the epilogue, didn't get released until I think it was 2013.
That's true. The afterword and, that special Fluttershy moment, which I was so happy to read. Like, that was a really nice conclusion.
But getting back to the villains, we also have the Goddess.
You mean the great and powerful Trixie?
And the thing about that is that, again, K-Cat did a great job of predicting what may happen. Twilight technically became an alicorn. And Trixie became a psycho, which we expected would happen eventually anyway. She became power-hungry, and she suddenly saw a way out was every pony on Equestria to be like her. But only unicorns, because no other pony could do it.
That was like one of the more serious elements I thought of the story was, like, the Goddess is sort of the logical extension of Trixie's, her strive to be, accepted and known, and, her desire to be, like, wanted and all that. And then taken to the most, horrific degree of becoming this hive mind, and her, her drive end up leading her to become the most, like, apparent intelligence in this sort of hive mind. Like, I thought that was really cool. I don't know.
Well, I don't know. You say she edited in 2012. But that still would have been before the end of Season 3 when all the Alicorn stuff came out, so...
Yeah.
So still, that's... Sorry, but,
Sorry,
so yeah, the Goddess... Well, my... Make an edit note. My phone buzzed, and I just, my train of thought went... I know when I found out, when I was listening to it, I was just sitting there, and every time stuff from the past got worked in, I was just usually blown away, because it usually made so much sense, but also because I'm attached to the characters. As she's unfolding the story, I'm getting attached to her characters, but when I hear things about characters from the show, that would, really, like, hearing about the deaths of various characters from the show usually was very sad. And one of the first ones is my favorite character, Pinkie Pie, one of the first ones we hear about, and just especially the things that she was going through before, right there towards the end. And it made me so sad. And then when I found out Trixie was the Goddess, that's one of those things you have to laugh, because you're like, Trixie. It's like, oh, it makes so much sense.
The great
the way
and powerful.
The way it unfolded with, how she, they talked about how, after they talked about her fight with Twilight and how things kind of went downhill for her. And then Twilight calls her and is like, hey, come help us out. And then when eventually they find out, why there are those different colors of alicorns, that it's not, well, Trixie may be the main one, Twilight and then those other assistants of Twilight's from her ministry are the main blueprints for the kind of 3 different types of alicorns. And they each kind of had that color basis on the ones, and they each had their thing. And like Twilight, we see her teleport so much in the show, so that was her thing, was teleportation. And then Trixie, to give her a thing, it was like, oh, she'd figured out how to do invisibility. And none of the other ponies had figured out how to do the spell themselves. So that was like her own special thing. And then Gestalt and Mosaic being, telepathic twins and getting that telepathy thing in there. And that amalgam that she put together, it just, to make the whole goddess and all of her children, and I thought that was just a really neat thing. I'm still kind of confused how that one alicorn got chained up in the basement of the MAS.
Yeah, I don't know how she got locked down there. I like the idea of like getting far enough away from the, broadcast of the mindset, and like she sort of has some individuality returned to her. That was really clever. But
That's why I couldn't figure if like one personality was stopping her, and somehow like she chained herself up by one of the personalities taking hold. That was the best I could figure, but I was always a little unsure.
yeah, I figured that like she could only produce as many alicorns as ponies like she took over into the Unity, into the hive mind. Again, connecting all this back to the Master from Fallout 1 and the origin of the super mutants. Like, you can only you got to put them in the dip before they can become an alicorn. So
Yeah, it's kind of the limitation. But she still had 1,000 plus alicorns on her side at one point.
yeah.
But in the end, she does get defeated because she kind of gets tricked into killing herself with a mega spell.
I know. My jaw literally dropped because I was at work, like I said, listening to this, and when it was revealed that how Little Pit figured to deal with her was that mega spell, my jaw literally dropped. And I was like, "Oh my god, they planted the mega spell!"
That was awesome.
I didn't see it coming at all.
Was that the same mega spell that they took from Silverbell, or is that the one that they use at the end?
Yes,
Okay.
it's the one from Silverbell that they took from the farm.
Where
does she plant it again? I can't remember that.
We don't actually know. No, Zenith. Zenith snuck in and did it because that's why she had her mind erased, or her memories taken from her and memory orbs stored, so that way she wouldn't remember that she had to go talk to Red Eye. And we know that much happened. We know that she had somehow swindled him out of the bomb, and that's why he left Ten Pony Tower. And
that's right.
He used that bomb, planted it under the goddess's base, and then boom.
And then shortly afterward is when we lost Teal Hooves.
What was really shocking about it was the fact that it was just the wanton destruction of that whole area, just gone, wiped off the face of Equestria again. And then again we get it when Autumn Leaf decides to blow up all of Canterlot.
Oh yeah, that was sad, especially when you end up meeting Star Sparkle and everyone still alive there.
Well, this is one of my arguments. They took out they didn't just like melt Canterlot. They took out the foundations and stuff crumbled. Who's to say there aren't ghoul ponies trapped somewhere alive because they don't need to eat? So they're just if they're just trapped in a pocket, they're gonna just sit there and live there in a pocket of hell.
Chew their way out of the rubble, hopefully.
I hope they need to like go and have an excavation team to start digging through the rubble now that the pink's gonna not be so bad after a little bit.
Exactly. They've got endurance for sure. So you're right. There probably are quite a few of them still alive. And I mean, the fact that Lionheart and Mouse got out, so yeah.
And another villain to focus on is Autumn Leaf himself, the big bad asswipe.
Yeah, he definitely... Red-Eye was the most present villain, but Autumn Leaf, I think, was the most evil.
Yeah.
I mean, he and Cottage Cheese were kind of like on the same level of psychoses, but Cottage Cheese wanted to become basically immortal, and he was trying to lead the Steel Rangers down a darker path, which is why the Applejacks Rangers kind of get formed. While Autumn Leaf is just straight up, I'm going to prove everyone wrong. I am more powerful than you. You will all die.
And Autumn Leaf had an army to back him up, which made it so much worse.
Yeah, for him, it was like they saw that their society couldn't sustain itself anymore, so it was like, okay, we're just going to invade and take over the surface again and, try to reestablish government down there. But nope. That's what you get when you take on Little Pit Boy.
And, unlike Trixie, who basically was the virtue of corruption, Autumn Leaf technically didn't have a virtue. He was just sort of a jerk.
Yeah, he had the virtue of being the type A child in a very militaristic family.
So how about them side characters like Ditzy Doo and DJ Pony and Silverbell, Lifebloom, Cage and Reggie, and who am I missing? Oh, Lionheart and Mouse.
well, probably the biggest one out of that. Well, they're kind of probably tied, but the two biggest out of those being Homage and Ditzy Do. Homage because she's one of the new elements of Harmony, and Lil Pip's lover.
Yeah, what
And,
element does she become again?
Honesty.
Honesty.
That's right. Telling the truth across the wasteland, no matter how bad it hurts.
That's right. And then Ditzy Do, who we all know and love from the show. And so how's that for nice? Oh my God, someone from the show. And also kind of especially considering when this was written again. But in the show, she doesn't talk. She's a background character. And then even it got to that point where we didn't even see her anymore. And in the story, she doesn't talk. She conveys things through writing, but we don't have to hear her voice. Somehow, that was skirted and everything. But and the fact that she gets to be one of the new elements of Harmony, a pony from before is one now, and it makes so much sense.
And she even gets a love interest in the end, so there you go.
Yes.
It's so nice. See, I'm a sucker for happy endings. I always like reading happy endings in stories.
Oh yeah, I definitely like happy endings.
That's why I wish there was a way Steel Hooves didn't have to die, but he did, so okay, I'm accepting it.
I think that for me, in a way, that's a happier ending for him though, because he's no longer suffering, and he's with Applejack. He's with his love.
Yeah, that's true.
And probably their child too, because it's been enough time.
That's true.
He can meet his kid.
He or she probably had a full life in the stable, as full of life as
Yeah.
All right, I get to live in a 10,000 square foot box forever. This is fun.
Now those stables had to be good size to have whole apple orchards and all kinds of stuff. Sometimes thinking about the scale of it, I was just like, wow.
Yeah, because I know in Fallout lore, the vaults were made to support 1,000 people, I'm pretty sure, even though it doesn't feel that way in the games because of his limitations.
Yeah.
Yeah, those... Actually, real quickly, just touching on their virtues, Homage is definitely knowledge, and Ditzy Do is ultimately survival, and she wrote the Wasteland Survival Guide.
That's right.
Not unlike a certain character from Fallout 3.
Yeah, Moira Brown.
Yep.
Who's a little ditzy.
So the question on everyone's minds is, does Ditzy Do have a bigger mustache or not?
No. No. But Ditzy Do does eventually perform the Sonic Rad Boom.
That's true. That is pretty awesome.
Even though we find out it's a trick and DJ Pony's really a girl. There are other... I mean, that's just the Fallout 3 connections. There's the Fallout 1 connection. Life Bloom, for example, is that crazy doctor you meet who can pretty much cure your character of any ailment. And then there's Silverbell. Oh, Silverbell.
Oh my gosh.
That poor girl.
That was sad. That was a feels moment also. Like, oh my gosh.
She just...
Yeah.
I mean, here's my take on Silverbell. I feel like she's one of those, and I know people can always argue about what characters represent to them, but Silverbell to me is basically that child character that was abandoned, whether her family died or whether they were murdered. She didn't know what to do with herself, so she made up her own little fantasy version of reality. And she focused on something, and she became fixated on it, and she developed a psychosis over it. And in her case, it was Pinkie Pie. And she wanted to be so much like Pinkie, she gained stalker-level worship and cut off her own horn.
Oh my gosh.
And considering how that horn looks and how even it's been hinted at that it's basically an essential part of their anatomy, that had to hurt in more than one way. And then to be completely cut off from a natural talent, which is magic for her, that was just like, whoa, she crossed a moral event horizon. And she's only a kid character. And then she makes an entire museum in what I felt was the old Pinkie Pie homestead, their old rock farm.
Yeah, I think
and she just Pinkie everywhere, right up to the mentats that she carried, to the formula to make them that little Pip eventually steals, that just you feel sorry for the character. You really feel sorry for Silver Bell, and it's a really sad character. Granted, it's a very quickly resolved issue. They do get her some help.
She ends up having a whole family.
She ends up having a whole family, and she does have a happy ending. But there are points where you kind of feel like, oh, please don't let this character die. Please don't let this character die, especially towards the end.
Oh my gosh, that would be hard to deal with. Yeah, and you're right, because that is one of the most feels thing is that it's a kid going through this horrible, horrible life, and then on top of that, the fact that everyone in her family dies from the result of the wasteland evil, because they're killed by raiders, right?
Yeah,
or something.
Yeah, they were killed.
So it's just, my gosh.
Yeah, it wasn't a precious thing.
So of course it screws you up. I mean, to very extreme degrees.
And it's just, I don't know, I was so worried that they were going to kill her off towards the end when the Enclave was invading, because they mentioned her like 8 times towards the end. And every time she got mentioned, it was like, no, no. But she lives to the end, so I'm happy. Then you got characters like Lifebloom, who, I guess in a way, he's sort of like a replacement, but not quite a replacement for Velvet Remedy. I joked to you, SkyBolt, in the past, and I know I told Maybell about this too and a couple other ponies out there, that when you read Fallout Equestria, after a while it starts to feel less like Fallout and more like Final Fantasy. Because you just want to imagine these pop-ups, like, Velvet Remedy has left the party, Silver Bell has joined the party, Lionheart has joined the party.
That's true.
And I mean, some characters, they don't even appear to the very, very middle end.
It's like, I'm sorry, you already have a companion. This person can't follow you right now. It's like, bull crap, they can follow me. I need a whole team, man. I'm going into attack like this crazy, like,
That's what's really nice, because in the games you can like have just one person, and it's like, why can I only have one friend at a time?
Yeah, why can't we be an awesome posse? Awesome posse.
That's really nice. Yeah. Little Pip gathers all these other ponies around her, and some of them come in, like you said, late in the game, like Cage and Reggie, God's kids coming in and joining them, and then almost immediately, Cage dies, and you're just like, what? How are you going to explain this?
Because I know, in reality, if I were in the Wasteland and I had to travel for one reason or another, I would have a whole ensemble with me. Like, safety in numbers, man.
Exactly. And I don't know. Getting back to the characters, though, I think that Silver Bell really... Her virtue is curiosity, but she becomes the element of generosity.
The element, that's one of the things is... Because... And I wondered about that. And that's why... And I remember discussing it with you. That I think that she, could be that element of generosity. Because it's never specified.
No.
Really? Huh.
Yeah, the only elements that are specified are 4: Velvet Remedy as kindness, Calamity as loyalty, Homage as honesty, and Ditsy Do as laughter. Generosity and magic are never mentioned. I said that, like I said, I listened to the dang thing 3 times in a row, and I'm going, where are these other characters? And it seems to me quite obvious that Lifebloom has to be magic. Once they mentioned that he just has a knack for all the spells. I'm like, there.
They do sort of imply that. It would make sense for her to be generosity, I think. And especially, like, in the epilogue, that's 10 years later, so she would be a teenager, or, like, late teens, early 20s.
Well, she had her cutie mark. She was old enough to have it when we met her. She was just covered up with paint.
Oh, that's right.
But, so that was one, because I'd wondered at first if she was too young, and then I was like, oh, that's right. They mentioned that she's kind of more of a teenage right then. Older than when Little Pip got her cutie mark. And at one point, after Arbu and Little Pip's going through her whole struggle with what she's had to deal with, and can she come back? Can she be redeemed? And, or is she just lost forever because this thing she did was so horrible? And she has this one thought, I wish I had a quote from the story, where she's thinking about, well, Silver Bell, she overcame her corruption, because she was corrupted laughter he talked about. With the corrupted virtues thing. And she's like, she overcame that. She turned a new leaf. They got her a loving, pony to take care of her and to give her back what she'd been missing with Ditsy Do, to give her a family again. And when they'd last seen her and she saw Pyrelight, and they're like, oh, she's gonna spend all of her time trying to make everything as beautiful as that bird. They could see the little filly was so inspired, and now she wants to try and give joy to others in a way. And I thought, well, since we already know Ditzy does laughter, it would I could see her being generosity, and she's painting the town and stuff, and she's trying to give back.
Yeah.
And that's
like that scene where she hasn't seen her in a while, and Ditzy's all like overly radiated, and she's like, "No, you have to stay back from mommy for a little while." It's like, oh my gosh, I just want to hug you.
Mommy's poison.
Oh, that line just threw me, because it's like, wow, But then there's the whole point, like Life Bloom. You're right. He basically is the element of magic. He also represents the virtue of protection, which is shared with Lionheart, at least in my opinion. And he's awesome. He heals ponies. He saves Zenith's life. He cleanses Little Pip of her addictions. He does a lot of things. He's just a virtually good pony.
Did anyone else get the arcade Ganon feel from him? Like, I don't know. He doesn't really have a lot of similar character elements, but I always pictured him as arcade. I don't know why.
Kind of, but not really. I sort of view him as another character from a different series, but we won't get into that here. Definitely non-pony related. Then, speaking of Lionheart, man, he is late in the game.
Yeah, I don't really think of him as that big of a character, really, because he comes in at chapter 45 or something.
But he gets mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Don't forget, he gets mentioned all the way back in chapter 20 when DJ Pony talks about him over the Wasteland radio, talking about...
Oh yeah, Lion and Mouse, other people being inspired by her.
Well, it started as just the Flying Demon.
Oh, that's right.
And until after Canterlot is destroyed, you don't hear about Lion and Mouse until afterwards.
That's true, because he hadn't met up with Mouse yet.
Yes, he hadn't met up with Mouse yet, but I remember very strictly in chapter 20 and 27, he gets mentioned on the radio twice about taking down Enclave soldiers. Well, taking down a group of bandits, I think is the first one.
Oh, yeah.
And then the second one, because the Enclave starts to have a presence by chapter 27 through 30.
Yeah, when they start dropping.
They start dropping slowly. He gets mentioned as a resistance group. But not it's not even, it's barely a sentence worth. It's like, and there was some fighting up near Van Hoover or whatever, wherever it was.
Yeah, those are just little hints she wanted to drop.
I mean, they were minor. They were really minor hints about who he and what he was. You're right, doesn't really show up in the flesh, so to speak, until 45. And then we get our first Bat Pony.
That was really clever, how they're like, oh yeah, he's sealed in his armor, so he is always using the Canterlot voice.
And I think it's kind of interesting because from what I understand, from reading and listening to other people talk about it, chapters 45 through the epilogue were mostly written after season 3 had already started.
Really? I thought she wrapped the story in December of 2011, but maybe I was wrong.
Not from... Well, maybe she went back and changed it. Because, from what I understand, Lionheart was a late addition because he didn't exist until after Season 2 was over because Luna Eclipsed was late in Season 2.
No, Luna Eclipsed was Episode 4.
Was it?
Yeah. No, that's why I thought he was a late addition, was because the whole concept of the Canterlot voice and stuff wasn't until... That was the Halloween episode of Season 2, which was 2011. And she wrapped the story in December, so I assumed she would probably have been at chapter 35, 37 by that point. I don't know.
True, because we don't even get a description of... Well, no, they do call him the demon in chapter 20-ish. So maybe she just didn't have an idea what he was going to be until then. But he's a great character, even though he shows up with his loud, booming voice, and he has that dragon that used to be in Canterlot that transmogrified itself into a mouse.
Yeah. You know what's funny? When they call them demon, I remember those subtle hints you mentioned now. I thought of Master Chief from Halo. I was such a big Halo fan growing up, and they're like, oh, the demon is coming.
But, I don't know. He's an interesting, fascinating character, where I think that his virtue is definitely protection. Mouse, because she was a dragon.
And Spike's
and, well, Spike gets a mention here, too, but because she was a dragon and she was basically kind of... I wouldn't call her bad. I didn't really think of the original dragon under Canterlot as bad. I just thought it was kind of stuck, confused, and angry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I don't think she was bad. It's just...
Pumping out the gas.
Bad circumstances. Nothing she could help.
Exactly, but when they shoved that magic orb, was it down her throat or something?
So they gave her a
It was
spoon.
gem, right?
It was a spell in a box.
Yeah. And I don't think they shoved it down her throat. I think like they launched it in Canterlot or dropped it in Canterlot, and then she ended up eating the dang thing at one point, and so then it became permanently associated with her.
And then
I meant the spell that changed her.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it changed her into a mouse, and then she started using whatever dragon magic she had, which I assume is the same as that teleportation scroll thing that Spike can do, which we do find out later must hurt like a bay. Must hurt painfully.
Hurt like a nag. Nag is the horse.
Hurt like a nag. She can pop in and out of that spear, which is kind of cool because even though Lionheart and Mouse are kind of late in the game, they're kind of endearing characters. You remember them just because they were late in the game.
And also the fact that you breathe poison is pretty epic. And also the fact that you're like fully equipped dragon but in mouse form.
that can be kind of subtly scary.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, let's get onto some of the species that we see in Fallout Equestria, which really do deserve a mention. Everyone knows the ponies, the unicorns, Earth, Pegasi. We don't see crystal ponies, which I guess wouldn't really happen until Season 3 anyway, would it? Well, end of Season 2.
Well, the Crystal Empire, no, Season 3 opener.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of far up north and stuff, it could be it's just kind of out of... It could just be out of the range of, they're not going to really...
Retcon accepted.
And obviously, as the timeline has been altered a little bit, because obviously we never got to the point where Twilight did turn to Twi'lek.
That's true.
I just said this story, it just deviates from that path.
Yeah, there was
lot.
no cadence, and the whole concept of the Crystal Empire didn't exist.
They may not have come back.
Exactly. So that works. But no, we have ponies, obviously, but we also get griffins, which is kind of sweet to see more griffins in a story. Even though now that Season 4 is out, we definitely know griffins are in, and they are a thing that actually exists within Equestria. Just to see them in a fan fiction was kind of cool, because we don't know anything about them.
Yeah,
ever.
they're little mentioned.
Little, but I like God, Reiji, and Cage, and all the griffins that were in the story. Granted, they all basically are mercenaries.
Yeah.
But that was a nice tie-in to
literally
the
Talon
Fallout
company.
series.
It is.
With the mercenaries being Talon mercenaries.
Mercenaries.
And griffins have talons.
Talons.
It worked out so perfectly.
Ha 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 ha.
But then you've got we have to mention the alicorns. I don't really know what they represent, because I can't figure out if they're supposed to be like the same thing as the super mutants.
I always figured that, that they were the super mutants, but with some changes. Because in the same way of Fallout 1, I think the super mutants were, like, receiving some kind of direct communication from the Master. I always figured.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was a telepathic level, though. I thought it was more like orders or, like,
something. Radio
Yeah, I
callers.
always thought they were super mutants.
But then you got the ghouls, which we already know. If anyone's played the Fallout games, the ghouls are the people that were transmogrified by the radiation into basically eternal living sort of undead things.
Yeah. I love the whole... one thing I'd forgotten until I started playing Fallout 3 again was the fact that they were a slow transformation. It was almost like leprosy, where it's like, okay, you get hit with this massive radiation, and then slowly your skin starts to peel, and your eyes start to discolor, and your hair falls out. Almost like chemo. I mean, it does make sense, because radiation is pretty slow acting in general. And so it's like, they slowly end up just becoming these walking zombies and rotting alive.
Unless you're hit by the pink cloud when you become a super ghoul.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And a pink cloud, that immediately reminded me of frickin' Dead Money. I think it's based on Dead Money, because, oh my gosh. That was so scary and so hard. And those were really good chapters, too. Their entire span in Canterlot was really cool.
Yeah, it really makes you fear speakers and pink smoke.
Yeah, and then when she finds Luna's bones on Nightwing, ugh.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. So then, of course, you got the dragons. I think there are only 4 in the entire story. There is the first dragon we meet that wants to eat ponies. I think his name was Topaz.
Mr. Topaz.
Then there's Spike, a.k.a. the Watcher. Then, I don't even know if the dragon under Canterlot had a name.
Yeah, I don't know if she had a name. I think she was just... Well, she's Mouse now.
Well, Mouse. Well, then there's also the Cyber Dragon.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Which-
Red Eye's Cyber Dragon.
Yep.
Which was the callback to the dragon from the episode with Aloysius.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
So,
And I guess the dragons kind of, obviously not being anything like the alicorns, but they're kind of, between them and between the super alicorns, it's kind of, like the behemoths.
Yeah, that's true. That's a really good like tie-in for them actually.
The super alicorns obviously would make more sense to technically be the behemoths because they're just basically big, really much harder to kill super mutants. But the dragons, they don't really have a full equivalent, I don't think, in the games.
No, I mean she definitely had some really big ports from the Fallout series into the story, of course, because it is a mashup. But I feel like she took some really good original approaches to each of them.
like the Hellhounds.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, they're the Death Claws, I thought.
Well,
Yes.
they are, but in a way they're not, because the Deathclaws don't dig up under you, as far as I can remember.
No.
They
super mutants didn't do a lot of the things that the alicorns do, but
Exactly. I mean,
but the Hellhounds were controlled by the Enclave, just like the Death Claws were in the
Deathclaws.
game.
yeah.
So that they had their tie-ins.
And then there's always all those dangers of the wasteland. From radiation to taint, to rad roaches and bloat sprites. There's a lot to cover when it comes to bad things like that.
Just to mention,
and
we've already
Sprite.
mentioned a lot of them, and
Yeah.
just in our talk about, but the Star Spawn, the sea that take the Ursa Major or Ursa Minor that we kind of saw from the show, and alter it in such a way, and then especially having Zenith like freak out about it because of the star aspect.
Oh, yeah.
That was a real, I thought, neat original thing that she did there.
Well, heck, making the Manicords basically immune to radiation and the taint was kind of interesting, too, because as far as I know, there's no Fallout equivalent for any creature that you meet anywhere in the game that's immune to either of those things.
Yeah, I always figured the taint was basically the Red Cloud from Dead Money.
The taint is more like the...
I guess it would be more like the... No, it was the FEV. Never mind.
It was
more like
the
original Forced Evolution virus.
Yeah, the original Forced Evolution virus. That's really what the taint represents.
Pink Cloud was...
The pink cloud is definitely the red cloud, but the Manticores are the only creature we see in the entire TF Fallout Equestria that are not affected by either.
Well,
Yeah,
I
I know. That was really interesting.
in the games, it says on, I can't remember where it says it in Fallout 3, it's like dogs have been virtually unchanged through all the radiation and everything. And I was like, oh, it's because I
That's true.
mentioned
They're
that
just vicious. They're just like wild feral.
Yeah. Somehow it's just because they can't find enough food, but...
Yeah, you'd figure that.
But then you got the blood wings, and the rad roaches obviously have to get mentioned because they're scary things. The bloat sprites, oh my god.
Yeah.
Or
how about the creatures from Stable 29 that they have to root out? The half they're basically the
ghost, whatever.
24.
Yeah, no, they're like the Night Stalkers, where it's like half snake, half cat from that.
Oh my gosh! All the way back. I totally forgot you're right because of the weird magic mishap.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm slowly re-listening to the story for the animation's sake.
It takes a while to remember these things. You're right. I totally forgot about those. They are the Night Stalkers.
Oh, that was pretty hardcore, and now Calamity's freaking dying. It's like, okay, I need to pump you full of anti-venom now.
Anti-egg venom.
Oh my gosh. That's the worst death ever.
And then there are the slavers, the raiders, the enclave themselves. Yeah, they get kind of, even the tank ponies, they all kind of have a role to play somewhere in the story.
Well, aside from the dangers, there's a lot of different running themes in this, and we've talked about a lot of them. The main theme, it's odd to almost call it a theme, but because it's just part of the story. In the Fallout themes, we've talked about a lot of the connections there being they place names, the various dangers, just different plot settings that are interwoven. And I'm not sure if this was anywhere, and I didn't see it in Fallout 3, as that's the only Fallout game I have to go off of. But a theme that I liked that overarched throughout the whole story, they all were trying to find their virtue. in the wasteland, and Spike kind of gets Little Pip set on that whole thing. But they started coming across, Little Pip was labeling them corrupted virtues. And the first one she meets where she really kind of comes to that conclusion that it's a thing is with the whole situation with Monterey Jack. She meets Silverbell and God before him, but she recognizes it with Monterey Jack because he tells her, he's like, you have to have a virtue. And he's like, and she's like, why are you doing this? Because he sets himself up to die when he admits. And through that whole thing, I'm just like, oh, Little Pip, keep your mouth shut. And then I'm like, Monterey Jack, why are you doing this? Don't be stupid. But he sets himself up because he's like, his thing is honesty. If he wasn't honest, if he didn't live up to that part of himself that he had, his own virtue that he had decided upon, he would feel like he was letting himself down, that he wasn't being true to everything in his life that he was, trying to live up to. He felt like he would, even be cheating his children because he wouldn't be doing what he had set out to do with his life. He'd be lying and everything, and that was a big deal for him. But as Little Pip says, and as anybody would usually point out, dying just so that you admitted to trying to rob Little Pip and failed at it, at one point, that's no reason to die and leave, orphan your children. Kids need their parents. And what he did was selfish. And Little Pip was like, oh, he just was tired of everything and he wanted me to take care of his kids. And he knew I'd do it because I was, just the sappy filly that would just, he knew I wouldn't leave the kids. He knew I'd take care of them. And she's like, honesty, he might call himself, but it's corrupted. It's not right. And then she and thinking about it a lot later, she's like, Silverbell wanted to be laughter, wanted to be, like Pinkie Pie. And so she represented then a corrupted version of laughter. She was acting like she was laughing, but it was to hide the pain of losing her family, of being left alone.
I know.
And yeah, and there, it's like where Velma Remedy are like, oh, that little filly is so sad. And Calamity's like, did we just see the same little, pink ball of Dash? It's like,
yes.
It's like, that's no. He's like, it's like, no, she's hiding. She's got all this pain and she's just locked it down and painted this pink mask of happiness over it. But that doesn't mean she's truly happy. So she was then corrupted laughter.
Well, then we can go on to talk about, technically these, I guess, they're not so much virtues in the story sense. They are, but when you compare it to MLP's originality, I guess they're the corrupted versions of harmony.
Well, that's what Little Pip calls them in the stories as well.
True. But then when she meets the goddess for the first time, Little Pip gets called corrupted kindness.
Yes, and it weighs on her conscience.
Throughout Philadelphia, it lays on her. Well, actually, it was right after she sees that mirror, too, that she really starts to think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because she sees herself as a blood-covered raider.
Yeah.
And that magic mirror. And we never do get an explanation for that.
We do.
We do? Did I miss it? I must have missed it.
Because, she's right after they leave Canterlot, and she's had that black book, and it's kind of like whispering things to her and trying to tempt her and things. And she has a dream, or I think it was kind of in a dream, and the book's all kind of like trying to tempt her. Oh, you can be all magical. Come read my secrets. Look at, this is your soul. You're this horrible raider. Look at you covered in blood, and just because that was supposed to be she thought the picture of her soul, and she's like, oh, I'm terrible, and I'm a monster, because it's of course after Arbu too, and so she's just terribly down in the dumps. And then by now she's completed her set of the Ministry Mare statuettes, and their little bits of soul come and help her like fight off and ward off the black book and not succumb to its evil whisperings. And then while she's kind of like, well, but look at my image of my soul, it's that raider me, and I look terrible. And Pinkie Pie goes, no, you're looking at it wrong, look behind you. And it's that image of her in that blood-soaked raider armor was when she first met Calamity, and he thought she was a raider.
Yeah.
And then, but the thing is, that image was actually her jumping in front of that family, that caravan.
That's right.
And, protecting them from Calamity, not knowing who he was at the time. And that's when she realized she was sacrificing herself to protect that family, and that's when she realized that that's what her virtue was sacrifice.
See, that was so cool because it brought the whole thing, around back to the very first day in the wasteland. So neat.
But then you got characters like Red Eye, who basically is trying to be generous, but generous for selfish means. And he is corrupted generosity. Sure, you can help revive the wasteland as my slaves. I mean, I guess the only other persons or beings we should talk about are God and Trixie.
Yeah, I mean, God was an interesting character for me, but for her, she kind of felt like Mr. Topaz or Deadeyes. I felt like they were just quote unquote Act 1 characters. Like, even though she does have more of a place later on at the end, she didn't leave that much of an impression on me.
But Little Pip even says that she kind of is like corrupted loyalty.
Yeah.
And then there's Trixie, aka the goddess.
There's Trixie. I'll be honest, I never really liked Trixie as a character at first, but she has really grown on me over the years. Like, I don't know. And so even her, even as the goddess, I don't know, there's something about the arc building up to it that was just really sad and really touching. Like, oh my gosh, trying to find redemption and trying to work with Twilight and stuff, and ends up becoming part of this horrible experiment.
But she was truly a corrupted version of magic when she became the goddess. There is no doubt about that.
Oh yeah.
So, I think in conclusion, Fallout Equestria is something that if you haven't already heard and you've already gotten yourself spoiled, you should check out. If you've already heard it, you should check it out again, because honestly, it's a great fan fiction.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this was really a review, but if it was, 10 out of 10. Yeah.
Well, since we're getting to the end of the podcast as usual, we're running out of time here for the remainder, how about some closing thoughts? Overall, let's talk about what each of us got out of the story, what they felt about it, and their overall final thoughts. How about we start with you, Maybelle?
Well, actually, this story is kind of weird. One thing we only kind of touched on in talking about it, but with Little Pip's addiction with the mentals, and then when she is looking back in the past, and we're learning about the main six, and we see Pinkie Pie's addiction to the mentals, and everything that Pinkie went through, even up to the point of her realizing she had a problem, and and her and Twilight fighting, and that was part of the problem with where things kind of went wrong in the past, quote unquote. That because the main six are representations of our strongest virtues, the elements of harmony, those great heroines of the past. When their friendship started fracturing, I think that's what really was kind of the downfall. The elements of harmony, I mean, it's harmony. That's when harmony fractures, that's when things started going bad. But to know that at the end, Pinkie was trying to get a hold of Twilight, and wanting to find help, and just everything where Little Pip was all like, oh, I don't have a problem, but when she saw, read and saw some of the memory orbs and the logs in the computers and things, and saw that Pinkie Pie even admitted her problem, and Little Pip starts going, hey, I guess maybe I do have a problem, and it's hard for her, but she fights back, and I was really touched by that, having known some people that have gone through addiction things, and so I thought that was really nice, that to really show her go through that struggle, but at first she's all like, oh, I don't have a problem. But then when she sees it from another point of view, sees Pinkie Pie doing the same thing, and she realizes, oh, I do. And then Velvet Remedy, being that stern friend that wants to help but still gets mad. And just that whole process. I was really touched by that. In a way, it's a small part of the story, because the whole story is so massive and it covers so many things, and I love so many parts of it. But that part really... I was really touched by that part, because there are a lot of people that fight with various addictions and things, and I thought that was a very realistic aspect. She didn't beat anybody over the head with it. It was just there and it was dealt with, and so that's something that I really took away from it. And my final thoughts are, it is awesome.
Everything is awesome. Yeah.
Oh, I just watched that movie. But no, it was awesome. I was so pleased by everything that they took, that she incorporated from this show and put in there, and just the callbacks, so that, because sometimes when people do a fanfic, it seems like it can deviate so much from the show. It really feels like they're completely alternate universes. And this one, it took the show world and just built off of it, so you can actually see a clear timeline of the show stuff happened. Spike tells them the stories of
That's
the
right.
episodes that we know, and it's all connected.
That's right.
As
That's the
far
best
as
kind of fan fiction.
yes,
Deviating
where it
timelines.
seems seamless and it seems canon. So that was my I loved it so much. It was so well written and well put together, and as long as people can get over the fact that the ponies use guns, you should always read it.
I know. Even like, I know the guns are a silly thing. I guess that's the hardest part for like to try to explain to someone who might not be a pony or Fallout fan. It's not like, it doesn't seem to work on paper. It seems really weird. Like, especially Fallout, which is a franchise rife with post-apocalyptic darknesses of the world just being dead and dying, and there's death and rape and all these horrible things, and yet it's like I said, I don't know, somehow it seems like it rings more true because you can be more sympathetic for the characters. Like for me, I've read as far as a fan fiction goes, I've read like a handful of like the shorter ones and kind of like sillier comedy stories that like one in particular was like the 9 ways to how to woo your lady in 9 steps or something, like a Spike rarity shit fic. It was funny though, really well written. But besides like a handful of those, I really gravitate to the bigger, more epic stories. Like I started listening to the Upheaval Breaking Point audiobook that Forrest Rain's been producing forever, and I fell in love with that story. And so then Fallout Equestria, when I finally got to that, I'm just absolutely in love with it. Again, because I have such a grounding in Fallout as lore, and it really, actually, like I said, after reading it, I went back into some of the Fallout 1 and 2 stories and history, and it sort of drove me deeper to being a normal Fallout fan too. And me and a friend, we even had this whole road trip that we took down to Vegas, and we had like a Fallout, Vegas photo journey. We stopped by Good Springs and Nipton and the Ivanpah solar plant, which is basically Helios 1. It was a fun trip, and so it's gotten me. I've gotten to know tons more people because of it, like other normal Fallout fans that I've connected more with as I've been talking about it with more, and of course more Fallout Equestria bronies. And now I'm a part of this crazy animation project that we can't wait to get more stuff done for. But yeah, so no, I thought it was really well written. It was really enjoyable to hear. Like, it's only fan fiction in the fact that it's a or a combination of two, existing elements. But I thought it was more gripping than a lot of other novels I've had to read over the years or read for pleasure. Yeah, I enjoyed it tremendously. Oh, and so I guess it also reminded me of. It got me more involved into pony music. Like that was one of my earlier successes. Was after reading it, I did a parody song of "Radioactive" by Imagine Dragons, which had some pretty good acclaim to it, facing the Fallout. If anyone wants to check that out, and yeah, it got me more involved in the brony community. So again, anything that builds community is always good. Taking away from it, like, it's definitely something, like I said, I want in hardcover form, because it's become this nice little section of my life, working on songs and music and Stable Tech Studios and everything. And so and no regrets. It really combined two things that I've grown to love over the years in such a successful and gripping way. So that's overall my takeaway from it.
Well, I'm glad to hear both of your inputs on that. My takeaway from the end of it was it's great. It's more than just, for me, you're right, most fan fictions out there aren't as epic. And even I myself am currently trying to write a fan fiction as epic while borrowing from elements of other fan fictions, just because I like to tie stuff together to be a little more interesting and keep people's attention. But I think K-Cat did the best. I mean, I've never read a fan fiction before that kept me so engrossed that I had to know what happened next. Now, I've read Crisis Equestria, which gets boring at points, and I have put it down so many times, I don't even know what chapter I was last on. I'd have to start over. But I've also read This Is Now, which is another fan fiction out there, which deals kind of like with an epic storyline, like what had happened if Twilight Sparkle had never become an alicorn. And it takes that whole... You know how the fandom hated her being an alicorn? It basically takes that whole aspect and removes it, and it just goes back to a slice of life story. It's cute, but it's not epic. It's not interesting. Fallout Equestria, you're right, is a nice blend of the two. Now, what I've taken away from it overall is just that it's a great work of art. It should be allowed to be published. It should be allowed to be put out there. I understand.
Yeah, I'd love to see her make money for it because of how many people it's touched and all the fan art and music and things that have come out of it.
Exactly. My final thoughts on it, though, it's a great, gripping, epic story. It has a lot of heart-tugging moments. It has a lot of action moments. I found myself getting excited when characters would do certain things. I found myself getting depressed when other characters would have bad things to happen to them. I mean, when Steelhooves dies, my mouth must have dropped open. I was in the middle of work. I was actually, like, doing some emails, because there's times...
No!
Yeah, well, I just stopped what I was typing, and I had to go back and listen to it twice because I couldn't believe it. I'm like, he's got to be alive. He's got to be alive. He's a ghoul. He's a ghoul. He can't die. Nope, he's dead.
It was so sudden.
It was.
I was like, why didn't they just stick his head back on and maybe it was like, they did it real quick and, come back to life.
I don't know. Maybe K-Cat had... Well, I mean, it really worked, though. With him dying, it really made the story that much more epic. It wasn't like a happy ending, either, because lots of characters, if you count, there's a death tally. I'm sure there's someone out there who's made the death tally count already. But I think I counted like 97 different characters have died, even side characters.
I'd like to see a magical bandage and potion use, too. Just like those numbers in regular Fallout, it's like, you've taken 400 stim packs.
I think Little Pip wins with a 3,000 range somewhere along the lines. It's just, the story is epic. The story is great. It has inspired a studio to make an animation. It's actually inspired 3 studios to do 3 different things, an animation, a video game, and an audio play. It has inspired spin-off stories like Nobody's Business. It has more than enough fan art out there. It has epic animations. I mean, I don't know if you've seen some of them, but there are people that take that Gary's mod and put ponies in it, and they've redone Fallout Equestria moments.
It's really built a sub-fandom in and of itself. It's like, it's almost not even a sub-fandom of bronies anymore. It's like this weird, like, crossover fandom that's sort of grown, almost like a Venn diagram. Fallout fans, pony fans, both. And it's just amazing how much it's built internally.
And it is. It really is. And I really do hope the best. I really wish that K-Cat would be less secretive and less hidey, though, because I would love to have her on the show sometime to talk about these things. But, I respect the privacy, and I'm glad that they were able to sit down and write this in 6 to 8 months and even go back and edit it so that it fits more in line with Season 2, and the epilogue was just that much more awesome.
Yeah, I hope she's become successful as a writer or English major or whatever her, career journey is.
Me too.
So... that's pretty much our take on Fallout Equestria, at least for the Lunar Echoes podcast, this episode here. If you have not heard it before, we actually had a more in-depth discussion with the executive heads of Stabletech Studios, who are currently producing the Fallout Equestria animated series, which will be a whole episodic series of K-Cat's novel, adapted into awesome video form, with all the epic moments and everything, and music and voice acting.
Exactly. Well, Maybell, SkyBolt, thank you both for being on this epic podcast today. And as always, every pony, keep listening and...
stay pony, my friends!